All right. And now, there's a ton of crypto stuff going on. We got NFTs. We got people selling their own farts. We got Coinbase going live, taking over Wall Street. And I've got a special guest coming at you. Go follow him on Twitter. It's Guy Swan. If you're not familiar, he claims to have written the original white paper. Satoshi Nakamoto, he ripped him off when he established Bitcoin. And he's got a better coin, which he wants to tell you about. It's called Green Coin, which actually gives back to the environment while also being a cryptocurrency. And he's using most of his funds to track down Satoshi Nakamoto because he knows he's out there and he's going to have him killed for stealing the white paper. So, Mr. Swan, thank you for joining the podcast.
What is up, man?
Did I get any of that wrong? I just want to make sure I'm...
No, all 100% accurate.
Okay.
100%.
We really try over here. A lot of my audience came over from Part of the Problem. They like the hard-hitting news, so I try and keep things up to par and factually accurate for everyone listening.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. You hit the nail on the head right there.
So you have made the claim that you've read more on Bitcoin than anybody else. You've been petitioning for a conversation for a little while. Before we actually get into some of the hot topics related to cryptocurrency, can you tell us a little bit of the academic background? Or maybe you're as much of a bullshitter as I am and you know nothing and you're making bold claims on Twitter.
Maybe both. As far as the claim that I've read more about Bitcoin than anybody else, is just like, that's what the show is. Bitcoin Audible is I started with, I was an internet technician and I was on the road all day. And so podcasts became my thing. That's where Part of the Problem, Tom Woods, the whole libertarian lineup became my go-to. And I wanted to be able to read all the articles about Bitcoin because there was just this constant flood of stuff, but I didn't have any time to sit down and read anything. And I really wished for years that somebody would just read them out loud in audio. And one day I just kind of sat down on my bed and started doing it. And then started doing my own quote unquote guys take afterward. And expanded it into interviews and solo episodes, but the bulk of the show is still I read Bitcoin out loud. So it's audio books for all of every absolute last bit of the best Bitcoin written content out there.
All with the Southern drawl. Where are you from, actually?
Southern drawl.
Where are you from?
North Carolina.
Okay,
North
cool.
Carolina.
And if you had to recommend your top 3 favorites for understanding Bitcoin, or maybe even getting the in-depth look, what would you say are kind of the must reads to get yourself some crypto knowledge?
That is a good question. I recently did an audiobook, which is a great framework for how to think about Bitcoin in the context of our current monetary system. It's called Layered Money. It's by Nick Bhatia. That is a fantastic one for on the show, specifically Shelling Out by Nick Szabo. That is one of the quintessential pieces in the space, just because it goes through the history of money and some of the core fundamental principles that make money when there's this very difficult barrier that we have, where we think of money as the medium of exchange and the unit of account. But at some point, the money was only used by 2 people. And there are very explicit characteristics of it that suggest, while it's only 2 people, it could be a great money. It's what are those? Why does one money beat out another through it in all this crazy history of competitive monies? And Nick Szabo just kills it in that piece. And then another one is The Bullish Case for Bitcoin. By Vijay Boyapati. It's kind of a simplification, a short version of maybe the Bitcoin standard. But it's kind of all the fundamental principles you could get wrapped up in those 2, probably.
I got to tell you, the Bitcoin standard is one of the best books I've just ever read. I don't read
good.
Yeah, I don't read fiction books, and I mean that book introduced me to the concept of time preference, which was not something I was familiar with. He had a brilliant argument, which I love a good argument that changes my mind on something. And I'd listened to a lot of Doug Stanhope comedy where he really rags on overpopulation. Still love Stanhope, one of the greatest comics ever. All of his bits on overpopulation are great. But I loved the guy from Bitcoin Standard. He had his argument where basically it's a numbers game. You need to run through a certain amount of idiots before you get to a genius. And that what that genius can do for us is basically possibly solve all the problems that we think we have. So, keep cranking out idiots. Don't think that there's like not enough resources, because it just takes one freak genius to solve, crazy problems, like removing us from oil and getting us actually like on, sun energy or food out of algae. Who the fuck knows what some freak genius can solve for us?
Yeah.
But that's what's so good about that. Like I fall in and out of the habit of trying to read I read the news every day, but I try and read books like at night. And I have some weeks where, I read every night, and then I got I'll take a month off. It's like the way most people go to the gym.
Yeah.
But the Bitcoin Standard, I sat down, I read through it. It was a great read.
Hell yeah. No, yeah, I love that concept too, because like just in the nature of the market is the idea is that if it takes 200 people to get one person to come up with one amazing idea, is the market will spread that idea and compound it over every single participant. And like it will more than make up for the 199 idiots that you had to pay for to get there. But no, it's
a numbers game.
Book.
It's like sales calls, smile and dials. You just gotta crank out some dumbasses. So the first book that you recommended, what's the short pitch on kind of the concepts he brings to the table?
So Layered Money, Nick Bhatia kind of breaks down the history of what we think of as the monetary system, starting with kind of the first quote unquote virtual money, like the first stock market. It was the Amsterdam Bourse back in like the 1500s. And it was the first time that we were really trading IOUs. We were trading like second layer money, instruments, virtual instruments that were like paper promises to the money we actually used, which was like gold. And then it just kind of walks from there through the history of these instruments, how they rose and then ended up collapsing because they end up getting abused, because it's a whole lot easier to write a paper promise than it is to fulfill that promise. And then the construction of these quote unquote money pyramids, where you have different layers of money, and then every time there's a collapse or a default crisis, what you actually have is people trying to race back to the base money. They're trying to climb. They're fighting to get back down the pyramid to where the real money is. And then positioning Bitcoin as not another app, not like a payments layer on top of our monetary system. It is a new base money in which we are building an entirely new monetary pyramid.
I think for people into the fancy lingo, what you're describing of racing down to like the core money, I think the technical term for that is probably Gersham's law. Which in Rothbard's book, which I'm trying to read now, of a history of money and banking, it's the problem is there's almost too many examples in there where it gets like a tad boring, and he doesn't like. It's an excellent book. I'm sure smarter people than me would criticize that I even think that some of it's boring. There's almost so many examples in there where it gets a little bit technical, as opposed to just showing you the bigger picture, which is just repeatedly every single time someone's tried to create basically a bank and have some sort of a money that's not tied strictly to gold, it just becomes an inflationary scheme, and it doesn't work. It collapses every time. And what's interesting is we just have the biggest scheme right now. But if you look at history, it's not a sustainable thing. It's collapsed and failed every single time.
Yeah. I mean, it's fundamentally built for imbalance, and it creates counterparty risk on top of counterparty risk. Like, that's kind of the insane situation that our financial system is in because of the constant manipulation of prices, because of the manipulation of interest rates. Is we're so deeply indebted that rather than being isolated to our own little financial worlds, I'm indebted to the next guy who's indebted to the next guy who's indebted to the next guy. And you create a series of dominoes where 20 people down the line, one random bank can collapse. And because we're all tied together, we all fall at once. The whole thing is incredibly fragile.
We're all tied together because we need to create the illusion that this is sustainable. And for the US, that like there's demand for its debt at the low interest rates. And that's part of almost why the big banks do so well, is like they've almost hijacked the system where we're all held ransom. If they don't remain solvent, it
We're
shows the
fucked.
weakness in the entire
Everybody's
system.
screwed. Yeah.
And so, it's like we're constantly held hostage by them, and they're able to profit off of that. To go back to what you said originally with the with just the creation of almost what you were saying, it like the first, it's not really a derivative product. It was just paper money backed by gold. Now, the efficiency of that is that, gold, if I'm transacting in different amounts, I have to actually break it down. Maybe I got to hire someone to make the smaller coin. It is a little bit annoying to move around, or maybe there's a safety of it just being in the bank. And I can understand the practicality of having, let's keep the gold in the bank and the rest of us can use the paper. But the second you move over to paper, the biggest dumbass working on a farm can be like, well, wait a second. Like, if this paper thing, someone's going to try and cheat the system. And of course, the people that were making the paper every single time cheat the system in all of world history, which is that they put out more than exists in the gold, because of course you would do that. Like, you can game theory that all day. If someone's got the opportunity to print the paper that's supposedly backed by the gold, yeah, they're going to print more that's there.
They're going to do it.
They're going to do it. And then they can make the sophisticated argument of, well, we know how much gold actually is needed by how many withdrawals it is, so we know that we can actually overprint it. Which, like, yeah, that's convenient for you because you get to, spend the money that's the over. And of course you would do it. Like, every online casino, this is what's crazy to me about like what we just accept from banking. Lawyers, every lawyer in the world, they've got their the escrow accounts. I think they're called the escrow accounts, which is basically when like houses are going to close. There's all these different things that are going on. And so they hold basically money for their clients in escrow. Mm-hmm. Now, they could very easily sit down and go, I know that not all this escrow is being spent within the next week, the next month, the next year. They have a good understanding of that, and they could borrow against it even just to pay their own bills at the end of the week. Hey, I got to cover this bill. I know that this is sitting here for... If a lawyer does that, if it's 1 penny off to pay a bill and they're going to put it back in next week, I think they get disbarred or there's big problems for it. So now you understand, the system understands that that's like stealing.
Messed up.
We don't allow for it unless
fraud.
You're a bank. You're a bank, in which case, really, you can lend out 90% of what's coming in. You just have to keep 10% on hand, and you don't even need to do that because they'll lend each other overnight through the repo markets that you hit your 10% capital requirement, and government will back you up and say, hey, listen, even if people overdraw from you, we've got your back because we're investing in the whole system. So if you
they're subsidizing it at the end, they're not only making it like explicitly legal and then saying it's good for the economy for them to do this, for them to have the power to, like, I give them $100 and suddenly they have $1,000, but then they remove the reserve requirements altogether and then they subsidize it. Then they say, if they screw up, don't worry, we'll still bail out the customers. So as a customer, you have no need to shop. You have no need, just stay with the bank that you got. There's no difference between a good bank or a bad bank. Just stick with the incumbent. You're good to go. We got you.
Which oddly enough, that sell sounds good. You're like, oh, great. So I don't have to shop around and my money's guaranteed. But you'd be much better off if all these banks were competing for your business. You might actually get an interest rate. You might actually get a banker who is nice to you. You might get a better loan. There's a lot of things that comes with people actually competing, but it's funny that the government steps in and goes, no, we're just going to insure, and us, we're a bunch of dummies. So we're like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to have my money insured.
Yeah. And it's basically institutionalizing and cementing bad business practices. Like, the only reason business gets better, the only reason you improve business and working standards and customer standards is because customers get sick of the institution that does not give them good service and they move to one that does. If you're stuck, if you're in a situation where there can't even be competition and all of the bad actors are being bailed out, all you do is let bad, irresponsible business choices sustain themselves. You just keep funding everybody who keeps going out of business, quote unquote, and you never get new business. You never get an actual shift in how, like, we have the same shitty behaviors that we had in the 70s.
All right. So before we get into the appeal of Bitcoin and how it deals with a lot of the shenanigans in the banking system that we laid out, let's get into a little bit of the news of the week. The biggest one being that Coinbase went public. I think if you're a fan of Bitcoin, the high evaluation, at least at the moment, is good for you because it kind of shows how the extent by which the market is forecasting that there's going to be a lot of transaction and fees in Bitcoin, and that there's, built-in demand for it. I do, however, think that the evaluation was crazy, and I also know that most people who are really into Bitcoin are not a huge fan of Coinbase, and will tell you that that's the wrong place to have your Bitcoin. Full transparency, I went there because I'm an idiot, and it was the easiest place and way to do it. I'll hand it back to you. It's a first question, just being if you think buying Coinbase is a decent investment, and what you think is going on with the market's evaluation of it.
So I'll start with saying I actually think Coinbase going public is a huge deal. They're a massive company in the space. Excuse me, and their valuation is pretty amazing. It's pretty extraordinary, and they're bringing in boatloads of revenue. I do
Can
not
you
like
just because I don't know this. What are other companies that have like a similar, I guess, market cap would be the term. Like, who does this put? I'm sure they're not on the same page as like a Google or Amazon. So, like, who are they kind of on tier with?
That's a good question. I'm pretty sure they're actually on tier with a lot of the major banks, which was a little bit shocking. I saw
Like a
tweet.
JP Morgan even?
I don't think it passes JP Morgan. I'd have to
But
look
like
it
they
up
might be as big as like
specifically.
a Goldman Sachs or a Citigroup or
If I'm not mistaken, I saw a tweet that somebody was comparing Goldman Sachs' statement, like calling Bitcoin like a fraud or something like that, and then Coinbase's IPO listing at or above Goldman Sachs valuation. I
right.
believe
So
Goldman Sachs was the example.
I cut you off in the middle of a very good thought, which I hadn't, which I didn't realize until you had said it, but I'll let you finish it. Which is I think, suggesting that the fact that like we're not just in the fringe hands of libertarians, but now we're actually on the stock market with a dominant player. It means the likelihood of basically the government coming and shutting it down is less likely because more of the institutional players and your pension funds and some of the real money in the system will be there, which means the government probably won't have the power to just completely, basically just make it illegal.
Yeah, basically, the more intertwined with the quote unquote legacy system it becomes, and investments in people's pensions and 401ks and stuff, the increasingly exponentially difficult it becomes to just be like, no, we don't play Bitcoin anymore here. I honestly think that ship has already sailed anyway. But the real thing about Coinbase going public is that now this company, this exchange that just plays in quote unquote internet money, is a massive player in the NASDAQ. And that's a big deal. Like that's Bitcoin kind of sticking its nose into all of these boardrooms and saying, by the way, everybody who's ignored me, good luck. Like, we're here now. But that said, I don't really like Coinbase. I think it's actually really embarrassing that they have so little Bitcoin on their balance sheet. They have become a shitcoin casino, basically. They're just rushing to get the next token that they can get. They've done insider trading, and clearly been, whether it's leaking data or people within the company buying whatever said shitcoin it is right before it's listed. Like, we've seen this over and over again. They're not even that good of an exchange. They constantly buckle under pressure from users. I don't know. And they're also damn near like we're responsible for one of the biggest blunders in the history of the Bitcoin protocol. Luckily, the user activated soft fork, that whole movement back during the block size wars. I'm not sure exactly what you know about it.
I don't.
Well, basically, they were trying to force a protocol change. They were trying to they were pushing behind a software change to Bitcoin that would have changed the fundamental consensus rules, which means the network would have split. It would have gone out of consensus unless everybody had updated. And that software, which they got fully behind, they pushed, they demonized everybody who didn't support it, and tried to throw their weight behind it, saying, we're going to do this and you're going to like it, or you can go off and do your own thing. We're gonna make Bitcoin what we want it to be. and that software had a critical bug. And it never actually produced any blocks. The second the software turned on, the whole thing crashed. But luckily, the users were like, "Go right ahead. We're all running nodes. You're not going to be a part of our network. Good luck." And so it completely failed. And had they succeeded, it would have been a disaster for Bitcoin. But luckily, the users, myself included, I ran one of those nodes. Basically prevented them from having any effect, luckily.
That's interesting, but it almost runs counter to what we just said, that Coinbase being out there front and center with some market power is being good for cryptocurrency and Bitcoin specifically. If anything, that might
bag. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, might point to some of the one of the complaints I think you could bring to cryptocurrency is that in some capacities it does work similarly to stocks or other exchanges, but without the regulation. And I'm not a fan of regulation. I don't think the SEC is doing anybody any favors. I also think they probably protect more of the fraudulent actors. And I mean, the Fed certainly is bailing out people, but I don't think that the regulation is helping us. But just in terms of making kind of that case, I would think that there are more opportunities for fraud within the crypto world, such as launching terrible coins, or what you're describing, which is very similar to insider trading. If Coinbase knows that they're going to list something on their exchange, or that they're going to push it out front and center, so then yes, that's almost like being on, I guess theoretically, I don't know if this is a true comparison, but theoretically, that's almost like cheating the system where you're on the front page of Google, so you automatically have a viable business. If you can get in with Google, that if they're searching plumber, you're the first search result, Google just gave you a working business. And I don't know if there's so much market demand on Coinbase and so much of the stuff goes there that maybe they can kind of, they know their own algorithm for how to push something. But yes, the crypto market has a lot of opportunities for fraud, probably more so than traditional stocks. That's probably part of what's going on with NFTs. I'm sure that will change with time. That's not necessarily even a gripe on Bitcoin as much as it is crypto. And you do have to separate those two things. And I'm sure we'll get into that later. But just coming back to what you were saying, that might actually be bad for crypto in general if Coinbase is kind of a fraudulent actor and they're the ones that are, currently front and center.
It could be. I think they've pulled back on a lot of those sorts of behaviors.
Yeah, some of it's just getting a market. That's so true. You want that big, everyone does it, the high growth shit until you can get to market. And then once you're there, regulated by the SEC, you change all of these shitty practices.
We're playing by the rules. We're doing it right. Yeah.
All of a sudden that growth's not there anymore. And you're like, because it's almost like taking it's like taking steroids for the big action film. And then you get in and you get the big paycheck and you're like, oh, this steroid's bad for my butt. Like, I'm not doing this anymore.
I already got the paycheck. Why do I need to do that?
Right. It's like we can all study our ass off once for one final. That's what going public is. It's your one chance at the giant payday. And so you pull every trick you can, and then you got to clean up your act once you're there. So I do think that's a good point.
Yeah. And hopefully there'll be a better exchange. But I usually just kind of steer people away for no other reason than they're selling so many shit coins. And I think the kind of the mindset around all of that is just so backwards. I think we're just seeing like these constant cycles of selling shopping.com for $1 billion during the .com bubble, and there's nothing behind it. You know what I mean? Like the ICO bubble. Now we've got the DeFi bubble and the NFTs and all this stuff. It's just like, it's the same story over and over and over again. And people just get wrecked. So many of the people who are like hardcore Bitcoiners played that game. Like they know, like we're just sick of seeing people jump on some ridiculous nonsense coin that's been around for 3 months, sushi token or whatever dumb shit somebody's come up with this month. And then it skyrockets like 900% because it's got like no liquidity. And, they've got 20% staking rewards right now. And you get this short-term boom and bust and people just get wiped out. People put
So
hundreds of thousands of dollars in this crap and then just watch it all go to zero.
are you a Bitcoin is money, but everything else is crap crypto investor, or are you a believer in crypto past Bitcoin that like you see that Ethereum has more value, for example, when it comes to actual transactions? So you like Ethereum, or maybe there's a different crypto that you like, but I know that within the crypto camp, there are two different kinds of investors. There's Carr, who is the guy who brought me into this world, hadn't read the Bitcoin Standard,
my
which
boy.
says,
I love
oh,
Carr.
oh yeah, he's the man. Are you going to be at Childerberg?
I'm actually trying to make it this year. Yeah.
Hell yeah. I'm there. Guys, I know some of you, quick plug. I know some of you guys have hit me up. Childerberg is going to be a blast. I'm there for 2 full days. I'm just going to be hanging out. I'm doing a show one of the nights with my friend Kyle. And if you're looking for Childerberg online, just go to Twitter, find them on Twitter, message them directly. They'll get back to you with the info. I don't even know if there's formally tickets, but it's definitely going to be a fun hangout. Dude, you should come down for it. It's going to be
show up, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of the way
my
it
wife,
is.
but then she was like, camping? Camping? No.
No, you can get a hotel by there. You get a hotel by there, and you pick up some barbecue. It's going to be fun, man.
I think I'm going to. I've kind of set my mind to it, but I'm trying to pretend like I'm still thinking about it, but
Right.
it's going to happen.
Nice. Hell yeah. All right. So we were talking about if, in your opinion, it's Bitcoin or bust, or if you see utility to some of the other cryptos.
I'm Bitcoin or bust. I'm a quote unquote Bitcoin maximalist, but I don't want that to come with a lot of the prejudice that is tied to it. Usually that means, or a lot of crypto people mistake that for, this person doesn't even want competition in there. They love Bitcoin and Bitcoin is the only thing and everything else is shit. And I honestly don't care. I do not care. My goal is to end the state monopoly on money. That's my goal. If that means we have 10,000 different stupid currencies, all right. I could not care less. I would be ecstatic if that's what happened. I do not think that's what's going to happen.
Right.
Everything. Yeah. Sorry.
I think that if you're evaluating, because let's, I guess next we can get to your vision for crypto and why you think it's the way that we can defeat the state. But let's just let's put on the investor hat for a second. Okay. So the argument against these other cryptos would be that they don't really have the perfect white paper decentralized currency in the same way that Bitcoin does. And so they're actually a slightly different product. You have more technical expertise. So I'll hand it back to you so that you can explain at least why your opinion, Bitcoin is a worthwhile currency, why everything else is something a little bit different.
So being decentralized and being independent is not something that's like a light switch. Like it's not just like the code is there and therefore it is. It's something that has to be earned. It's like the security of a new cryptographic protocol. Like you can't just be like, oh, this is secure, and then like there's some magic sauce where they can just know that, oh, this is the best cryptographic protocol that's ever existed. It has to be beat to death for 15 years before they're like, okay, yeah, we beat the hell out of it and it stayed working. And that's kind of the same thing with a decentralized protocol. Is it has to get through a very important maturation phase before you can actually call it decentralized. And that's where I think like the block size war that actually happened back in 2017, Bitcoin survived all of those tests. And at the end of the day, this is money. This is money. It is one of the most like cohesive, like communication tools that we have at our disposal. There's a reason we're not speaking 2 different languages right now, is because communication protocols tend toward one. We don't log into like one of our favorite 5 internets. We log into the internet. Now, there were a lot of attempts at modifying and making a quote unquote better internet protocol, but we all ended up on TCP/IP. I think that's exactly what's going on with Bitcoin and all of these currencies, is everybody just, it's open source and it's free. And there's so much ignorance around what money is and how these systems, like how protocols will develop as time goes on. And there's so much money to be made by printing your own money. You could just make bukus if you could just type into a computer, I have 1 million tokens, and then sell those tokens for actual money. The incentive there is just astronomical. So if you think you've got some sort of little marketing gimmick or some little feature or tweak that you're like, I'm better than Bitcoin, you're going to do it. So I think this is an inevitable stage of the whole thing.
Well, there's something fascinating to me that if you were to compare, let's say you at the end of the day, most people, because Bitcoin is not the easiest thing to transact in. Sure. So it is a little bit something that you buy as a store of value. But that also means that as a store of value, you're kind of competing with stocks. That I can say, hey, I think GM's a really good store of value because it's got this income stream tied in. And I think that, they've got growth opportunity, and all stocks trade at a PE ratio. They're all kind of 15, or now I don't know what the fuck it is. Historically it was 15. Now it might be like 25, 30. I'm not really in the market.
Now it's ridiculous, but yeah.
I'm really not in the market in any capacity, but it's in that sense, you're kind of buying future earnings, but you're not really, because once it's at 30 times the price to earning ratio, you're more buying the market demand for that asset, which is partly why stocks are so inflated. So you can almost look at, the crypto such as Bitcoin in some ways is competing with, hey, do I want to go buy General Motors and hold that stock? Now, what's interesting when you start considering that, and we can get into why we think Bitcoin has so much utility versus, just buying General Motors stock. But as you get further away from Bitcoin and just into the land of crypto, why would I buy Dogecoin with zero returns, right? Like, I mean, I get it. I guess I'm saying there's so many idiots out there that kind of think Dogecoin's funny, that the demand for it's going to go up as more and more people just go, hey, this is funny to buy into. Right? Like, we're all just going to buy into the joke coin, which then it gives it value, but that's way less predictable than, or I would think it's way less predictable than going, hey, I like the potential future revenues of General Electric.
Gotcha. So in the context of stock versus a money, something that is a money, is a monetary good is specifically one that is independent. Like, this is why gold was historically, it really is the best money like throughout history, and it had the longest Lindy effect. It had the longest place where it was the dominant, like metallic metals were the key thing in most of history. And the reason is because anything that, like, money is proof of work. Money is that thing which secures the value you produced in the past and lets you use it later in the future. If I buy a sandwich, that's just rotten in like 2 days, right?
Don't talk down to sandwiches. Not on my podcast.
You gotta eat them quick. You gotta eat them quick though. If I buy a car, it's going to rust in a couple of years. It's going to start like wearing down. It's not new after it's been sitting in my garage or it's sitting in my driveway and weathering for a couple of years. Like, things do not maintain their nature very well. Everything degrades. The thing that is money, the thing that ends up being money, is the thing that sustains itself, sustains its characteristics best over time. And actually, I think it's Rothbard that says money is the ultimate hedge against uncertainty. It is the good with the greatest demand in the economy, and that can satisfy like everybody actually buying into it, everybody getting it. And then it keeps all of those characteristics, even though everybody is actually buying into it. Like anything else is like, we bought houses like crazy to store value. People would just build more houses. The supply can actually continually increase with the demand, and therefore it can't be ultimately scarce. People will just figure out all the new ways to do this. Like, scarcity is an incredibly difficult thing to come by. And that's why the monetary metals were so unbelievably good at this, is because you can't make any more gold. Trying to find more of it gets more and more difficult as time goes on and as adoption spreads. So it becomes an incredibly good store of value. That's the fundamental purpose of money. And that's the fundamental purpose of Bitcoin. But it's a protocol. It is digital scarcity. It is the discovery of a way to keep tally of things in the digital world that cannot be copy pasted. All the payment systems, like talking about using it as money, TCP/IP kind of sucks for streaming. You have to build another layer on top of it to actually make it so that we can packet stream and it actually looks like a consistent piece of video. Same thing happens with Bitcoin. You put a new layer on top of it. It is a base layer protocol where it basically figures out a way in a new digital system to mimic all of the best characteristics of gold. It does it better. It does it more perfectly because it's digital. You can tally it all the way down to 100 millionth of a unit.
All right. So just to get into this base protocol idea, which is this is the first I've heard it put in those terms, and it's fascinating. And going off what you were saying, that there's going to be a race to one, because when it comes to technology, we usually build off of one. So why is it that the NFTs or other derivative products seem to be being built off of Ethereum and not Bitcoin? Or maybe I have that wrong. Maybe I'm just hearing that secondhand. But from what I understand, more of the electronic, I guess more of the transactional stuff is being built off of not Bitcoin.
So in the context of NFTs, NFTs, I think, are a massive bubble. Like an NFT is just a signature. That's all it is. Like maybe I'll pay a lot for Pablo Picasso's signature. But I'm not going to pay $1 million for some internet artist. But that's all it is. NFT is a signature. It's a signature tied to a specific file. But you can still copy and paste the file. Like all you've got is the signature. That's all it is. So people paying hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever for these things, I think, are just completely lost in it's a new gadget and it's going to be the new freaking cool thing. I think it's short lived. Whatever.
Well, I think the collectible aspect, which is what you're referring to, I agree with you. I think it's completely stupid. I don't think it's here to stay. And I think we're going to find out at a later junction in time that there was some sort of a fraud or tax scheme that was in some way driving these prices. Yeah. However, I do understand the utility of electronic contracts and that being tied to the blockchain, bypassing some of lawyers, all sorts of, like, the same way. I maybe this example is not a perfect example, but Airbnb and Uber came in, destroyed the hotel and the cab markets, right? In New York City, you could not, I remember you could not just decide, hey, I'm going to be a cab driver for tonight. I remember reading an article in the New York Post in high school about some dude who tried doing that and got arrested. And he was like, nah, they're just tipping me. The rides are free. Now they figured out a way through technology to basically do all those transactions. It kind of skirted whatever that old legal system was, that they couldn't declare it illegal or that you were a cab driver. And then
that good old regulatory arbitrage, and they scooted right through. Yeah,
they figured it out. So I guess as a theoretical, I don't know all the applications of this. Digital contracts might have the same capacity, whereas, for example, I kind of know because my dad used to be a real estate lawyer. So if I'm selling my house to someone, I mean, I need a lawyer to do the closing. I need a title company to actually say that the house is in my name. There's probably going to be brokers on both sides. There's a lot of people that get their hand in that little ordeal. Not to mention, I'm sure there's something with a mortgage broker. I could see as a theoretical the NFT version of that, where it's like, no, we're just gonna have a perfect record over here. We'll call it the housing house coin, right? It's gonna be house coin, and it's readily recognized by a lot of people that the house coin's good. We hired some lawyers out in India who did the whole thing for cheap, and it's a contract. If you say I bought this house, you said I sold that house, that's it. It's up on the house coin record. That's the end of it. You could potentially cut out, basically gut an entire industry and all of a sudden have something that was costing you, I mean, without exaggeration, probably $30,000, $40,000 between all those people. Maybe I'm wrong there. I might have that way wrong. where now it's costing you
No,
$200-$300.
It's cost thousands of dollars to close those contracts. Like it's
Right.
ridiculous, you know.
So you could
Closing costs are
potentially
huge.
just shift that over to a digital infrastructure that, as long as other people accept it, it's almost not that different than currency. If I want to accept a Bitcoin as payment from you, I accepted it. If if there's enough people that want to recognize that the permanent record online of that I own this house is just as good as that old title insurance that you have to pay for, then that's fine. I get like that could theoretically happen. So the NFT in its current iteration, which is this, like what you described, is basically, an autograph. It's stupid. That has no function. The idea of a digital contract does make a lot of sense to me, and I do think that that's something that's going to be a largely growing industry. And just back to the previous question, from what I understand, that utility function of the blockchain seems to be happening more, I guess, with Ethereum than it is with Bitcoin. From what you're saying, from a technical standpoint, is it could just as easily happen on Bitcoin, because even though the Bitcoin is a little bit inefficient, it's not that hard to create the secondary structure on top of it that handles this stuff. I don't know internet at all. I don't know how YouTube works, that they've created a secondary structure on top. IFP, is that what you called it?
TCP/IP.
TCP. I knew there was a P in there. I heard the P. I was like, I can remember the letter P. So I'll hand it back to you in terms of why you still think. Well, firstly, if you think in that capacity, NFTs or the blockchain will have value for not currency purposes, and if blockchain will be, if Bitcoin will be the crypto to capture that market.
Sure. Yes, Bitcoin will be the one that captures the market. And the reason is because all you actually need to do is tie a contract to a hash and put it in a transaction. You can easily do that.
So that whole long rant of mine, it's just as if I just do the technical language,
attaching
it's just
a
hash.
software result
right.
to a hash, to a set of keys. And you can easily do that. In fact, they do have NFTs on top of Bitcoin. The reason they're not a big deal is because there's no market for it in Bitcoin. Like, you sell it to crypto people. You sell it to people who aren't in it for it. Well, this is a generalization, but who aren't in it largely for sound money, who aren't thinking about like building a base infrastructure layer for a new monetary system. They think this is a new app. They think this is a new toy. And so they're rushing to get the next thing that's going to go up in price 10x this week. And so all the market is on Ethereum for those things. You can easily put an NFT on Bitcoin. People do. In fact, there's, I think, I don't know, there's like 2 or 3 things that I know and people have tried to like catch on, but Bitcoiners don't buy it. Bitcoiners just buy Bitcoin. So that's the difference. But this sort of stuff is program agnostic. So like there's an example of there's a tool called, God, I had to explain so many layers of this. It's ridiculous how technical some of this stuff gets so quick. But so Lightning is a great example of a second layer on top of Bitcoin. I use it all the time. I use it every day. I do 4 or 5 transactions every single day in Bitcoin. Maybe even more, some days it's a ton, and it depends on if like if somebody's listening, like streaming my podcast on, there's an app called Sphinx, and people pay me like 20 cents a minute to stream my podcast. And so like I might get like 200 transactions one day just because somebody's listening to something on Sphinx. None of that is actually on the Bitcoin blockchain. It's on a layer on top of Bitcoin. And in that layer, you can write like all the complexity and stuff. In fact, RSK is actually an example. It's a quote unquote, it's like a side chain on top of, that's attached to Bitcoin that actually runs Ethereum code. So again, you could do all of this stuff on Bitcoin. The reason it catches on with Ethereum is because the market that's the casino market. I genuinely think, and that they're specifically selling to people who are interested in that kind of gimmick.
And you think
right
it's
now.
all at some point in the near future, that's all going to get gutted once enough things bust that everyone gets spooked by it?
Well, the idea is that none of these things need their own token. If the only way that you could use Facebook was to go buy Facebook coin first and then pay a Facebook coin every time you posted,
Right. You would
Nobody
be
would
annoyed. You
use
wouldn't, no
Facebook.
one would use it. Right.
Like, it would be annoying as piss. The only reason that these things are catching on right now is because people think they're going to buy Facebook coin and then it's going to go up in price 20x.
Right.
And I think that's just
It's almost like buying,
99.99% of what's happening.
to go with your example, it's almost like buying the casino chips, thinking the casino chips are going up in value.
Exactly.
I mean, obviously the casino chips are tied to the US dollar. Like, I don't think,
but in the context of like all of these tokens, they're not tied to anything, right? They're just free floating and they're all illiquid. So the price goes all over the place.
Right.
But and in the, like, going back to your example though, with the housing contract, is I actually think that's a huge thing that will be tied to something like a closure on Bitcoin. Like, maybe you'll actually use your Bitcoin keys to close out a housing contract or something like that. And maybe it'll actually be collateralized with Bitcoin. But the point is that there's nothing the blockchain can do to enforce something that doesn't exist on the blockchain. Bitcoin cannot enforce my ownership of my house.
Right, because there's no police unit for Bitcoin.
There's no police unit.
There's no court case. There's no court system for Bitcoin.
So let's say the
you would need a secondary system to go, we all swear by the Bitcoin blockchain.
Right.
And so if you're living here, we're enforcing, that the blockchain will remain true in the physical world. But I understand what you're saying.
The connection from the blockchain key to the actual physical house is entirely reliant on the government. Is entirely reliant on some centralized system. Therefore, calling it decentralized because you put it on a blockchain is irrelevant, because it's got centralized enforcement. So if the government comes and steals my house, it doesn't matter that they can't update the blockchain because they don't have my keys.
Right.
They still got my house.
I understand 100% what you're saying.
Yeah.
I as a theoretical, I'm just we're in the land of fucking nonsense right here.
We're in fantasy. Let's do it.
You could theoretically have a decentralized enforcement system where different firms are actually bidding for the contract of enforcement. So our current model, and we're in La La Land right now. Yeah, we're in La La Land right now. And this this might be a good segue into your vision for why more libertarians need to be, talking Bitcoin, investing in it. But this is interesting because essentially, like the current basically, if I got my neighbors doing something shitty, I guess my option is the U.S. court system, the U.S. police. That's it. And that also means they're not really competing to actually help me out. There's a lot of faults in that system. Mm-hmm. Not to mention the fact that I would be reluctant to call the police in any capacity because I'm just like, well, how does this get turned on me? I feel like if you call the police, right, you're inviting trouble into your life because like it's like going to see the mob. Yeah, they might help you out. The Dom might help you out with your problem, or you might have just stepped into his office and now he's aware of you.
It has to be a serious situation. It has to be a very serious situation because otherwise, I don't want to be.
You're inviting trouble into your life, and I honestly that is the way I feel about it. So this is interesting. If you had a blockchain where I basically go, or keeping the record of that this house is mine. I go away on vacation. Somebody's living in the house. And so basically I just report back to the blockchain, hey, this is here. It's a perfect registry. And, here's the picture of them living here. And instead of, and by the way, I can go further with this. This is getting interesting. Instead of me just calling the cops, it's now like flagged, like, hey, we've got a problem. Who wants to go investigate, I guess, to verify that this problem is accurate? And then who wants to enforce it? Now, here's the other interesting thing. It could almost become an insurance type thing where built into the price of blockchain, right? You're almost purchased, like there could be almost a secondary network where you want to contribute to the enforcement of that contract, which essentially would work as an insurance policy, right? Because it means that if an issue comes up, there's now funds available to both pay for the resources of verifying that your claim is accurate and then someone who could initiate force against it. So you could potentially have a perfect system for decentralized funding of these things that everyone's like, how can it exist without government? And it would work better because they have to actually compete to put in their bid for, hey, I'm the judge and I'll go look into that at blank cost. So it's actually cheaper. And it would just come out of the insurance fund of you saying, hey, I want to contribute to like the enforcement,
to like my adjuster, my contract, like adjudicator.
God
No,
damn,
no,
we just
see,
solved the world's problems, dude.
no, see, like is actually like huge potential there, but the idea is to make sure all players have skin in the game. So in the context of like the housing contract, is that it's insanely difficult to try to think of an adversarial scenario in which you can have someone else enforce the contract for you violently. However, what you could do is have the person that you're trading with put up as collateral the same value of the house, so that you're all putting up like equivalent value in Bitcoin, in the thing that the blockchain, the system itself, can actually validate and can actually secure the ownership of. And that if something goes wrong or somebody tries to cheat the system, well, then you get the value of the house, whether or not you can actually obtain the physical house. So like that's actually
Right.
you everybody has the value of the house as skin in the game to conclude this contract agreement. And that's actually the idea of the Lightning Network, is that it does that with a payment system, is that you've got, you're staking Bitcoin into a contract that you can constantly update, even though you're not broadcasting back to Bitcoin. And then there's an insurance clause that says that if at any point someone tries to exit from this contract while the other person isn't there, there's this period of time where that other person can challenge whether or not they told the truth to Bitcoin. And since every update has to be signed by all the parties, if they only have one signature, the other person can prove that a later transaction happened. And so there's like an insurance clause built in, and Bitcoin is the court system. Bitcoin is the court system that proves, shit, you only had one signature. You tried to cheat. You tried to say that this old transaction was the latest and it wasn't. And then that person gets all of your money. Everybody's got skin in the game. And that's how you can create a new network on top of this thing, in which where everybody's like, oh, Bitcoin doesn't work very well with payments because you might have like $3 transaction fees or something. Well, Lightning has like a tenth of a penny as a transaction fee. And I do it like I said, maybe even 100 times in a day, because of this skin in the game contract that I have that allows me to constantly update and do thousands of payments, tens of thousands. Is it
like an old payphone where your podcast plays and then it like after 3 minutes goes, please insert another quarter?
No, you fund your wallet. So like Sphinx it's just connected to your Lightning wallet, right? And it's value for value. So they're donating the money. They don't actually have to. I'm trying to actually in the process of building a feed that doesn't have ads specifically for Sphinx. So the people who are doing that don't have to listen to the ads.
Right.
And what they could do is they just say, oh, I'm paying $9. I mean, paying 9 sats a minute, or I'm paying 90 sats a minute. I'm paying 23 sats a minute. Doesn't matter. They just choose. And then as they're listening to it, when it hits another minute, it just automatically pays.
Nice.
So they don't really do anything. They just set what their price tag is.
So I got 2 more questions for you, and then we're going to wrap it up. And the next one is the big one, which is, so give us the pitch. Give us the pitch for why Bitcoin is the best tool for taking on the U.S. government. And, you know, give us the big glamorous speech. Maybe I'll get like some fucking Braveheart music in the background. But you're a firm believer in what Bitcoin can do for us. So, you know, educate us.
So the greatest tool that government has to control and manipulate the economy is the ability to print promises that nobody else has the ability to print. The ability to create money out of thin air is the ability to consume an unlimited amount of resources and never give anything back to the economy. It is the ultimate power in an economic system. Bitcoin completely immunizes the economy from that tool. You cannot print Bitcoin. Anyone who attempts to cheat that system at all is evicted from the entire network. You cannot send fake Bitcoin to anyone who runs a node. And you cannot connect to the network if you are trying to create fake Bitcoin. The United States government would have absolutely no way to monetize its debt. No way at all. And when you look at history, have you ever read The Sovereign Individual?
No.
It's an incredible piece. I highly, highly recommend that book. It is an incredible piece back from the 90s, actually. It's like 96 or 97, I think. talking about it's basically a theory of history, and I think it's accurate, that the state of government and systems that we have, like governance systems that we have over history, are directly related to and consequences of the cost and reward of violence at scale. And
you got to repeat that for me.
it's the difference between the cost and the reward of executing violence on a population at scale. So when we actually became an agricultural society, when we stopped being, the reason governments didn't exist when we were nomads is because we didn't have any wealth built up. The amount of wealth that you had to carry on your back. So there was no excess to actually confiscate. When we stopped in one place, and if you were violent against somebody, they would just leave. That's all they did, right? They just left. They went where the herds went. So as soon as we stopped and became an agricultural society, we started building up massive amounts of wealth, but we were also stuck. We were stuck where we were. So suddenly, coming with your buddies with a bunch of sticks and confiscating 10% of your wealth, you actually had, because you had built up now a house, a farm, a family, oxen, all sorts of stuff, it made a whole lot more sense for you to just give up 10%, keep your 90%, and they got incredibly wealthy because they just had some sticks and the willingness to go beat you with it. That is the reward for violence on a huge scale was massively increased during that period. And all of the things that really changed that context, that risk reward ratio of violence in history, are actually coincide with the biggest changes in government and how government works.
In other words, the more wealth that's created, the more profit there is for government.
For being violent, yes.
And being violent, right.
And then the fundamental tools that really change.
And then they also can become more powerful. So it's like a bug in the system.
Loop. It's a feedback loop.
Yeah, it's a bug in the system that the more wealth that's created, in tandem, the more powerful government can become to extract from it. But then and then in the opposite way, it's like they can only slow down growth for humanity. So it's like
they're a poison. They're a poison that the excess wealth actually feeds them, but then they're a parasite and they end up growing to a size like a cancer that ends up feeding on the very wealth creation mechanism until it dies and the whole thing has to refresh. And all of the great technologies in history, the longbow, gunpowder, all of these things drastically changed how the dynamics of those government systems actually worked. And you saw huge shifts in what type of government emerged on the other side of those things. And then you had the Age of Enlightenment, and you had so many governments change with the printing press, because one of the key elements of maintaining government power was a religious belief in the government, and the printing press destroyed it, because no longer did the scribes in the church actually define what was holy, who had power. Now you could just you could exchange ideas freely and for almost no cost. Or I think the cost of a book over between 1500 and 1600 dropped by like 1/600th. Or it dropped to 1/600th of the price. Like the scale of cost of information during that period is just absolutely astronomical. And we had a renaissance straight out of it. We had like revolutions all across the world in consequence of the printing press. The internet has absolutely done what the printing press has done and then some. The ultimate barrier to freedom is the cost to exit. Our wealth is dependent on government. Our wealth is dependent on our jurisdiction. All of our money is based on authority. It's just whether the bank says we have it, which is whether the regional reserve bank says they have it, the Federal Reserve has it, the government says they have it. It's all authority from the top to the bottom. Bitcoin is money, is value without any of that authority. It does not give a shit whether you're the president of the United States or a 12-year-old in Guam. You have equal power over your capital. You can hold wealth that does not give a shit or have any idea about what jurisdiction on the planet you are in. And the cost to exit with that value is to memorize a couple of words. If you can memorize a key, you don't have to shove 30 pounds of gold up your ass. You can memorize a few words and walk naked across the border, and you could have $1 billion in that other country, and there's not a damn thing the government can do about it.
You know, it's firstly, that's one of the most interesting 3 minutes we've ever had on Run Your Mouth. So thank you for that. And I definitely have to go read that book. But I think what you just described, there's been a lot of sci-fi movies where The Day the Earth Stood Still is the best example that's coming to mind, where basically the sci-fi idea was that maybe there could be an alien creature that's almost going to have the third party monopoly on violence, and they're going to have a better way of like imposing and they're going to actually use it to combat other people being violent. And so it's going to make the world a more peaceful place because you've got like this alien creature, right? That is more powerful and is going to police away any violence. You've almost described that like we've kind of created that alien creature when it comes to distributing currency, which is the Bitcoin algorithm, right? Which isn't going to let like it's on a different intelligence playing field. It's not a banker who can make a decision for you, right? It's like this alternate thing that's keeping this perfect record, and it doesn't distinguish like
it doesn't care anything. It doesn't know anything about you, and it doesn't give a shit.
The status doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yep. And it is a court system for the ownership of capital that is entirely external to all of the political systems of the world. And you can run the entire court system
they have a track
on your computer at home.
Right. And they got the track record of using that power to steal wealth. It's not like it's not like we're looking at some system and going, hey, they've been perfect stewards of wealth for the last 1,000 years. Why would we challenge them on this? Look at how good of a job they're doing. It's like
they failed miserably. They failed so bad.
They repeatedly use this to extort as much as they possibly can. So here's a better system that removes that. Okay. So last question is, we were talking a lot